So hello everyone. This is Cristiano from PackIOT, and I'm glad to have another session of PackIOT talks. And I have the pleasure of hosting someone really special with great knowledge in the packaging industry. And I think it will be he'll bring great knowledge to you in the packaging industry, how data impacts the manufacturing industry, especially the packaging industry. So welcome, Robert. Robert, just a brief introduction. He will surely tell us a little bit more about his experiences. But Robert Champion, he's the CEO of Innoflex Solutions. So they provide packaging equipment strategy. He has over 30 years of CPG and OEM experience. So they provide strategic oversight for capital equipment systems and multi-factory operations for several Fortune 100 CPG multinational organizations. So he's a global thought leader in packaging equipment engineering, strategy, and management. Did I get this right, Robert? Welcome.
Well, Chris, good morning to you, or afternoon where you're at. And yeah, thank you for inviting Innoflex Solutions and myself to this webinar. We're very excited in your summarization of who Innoflex is, me being the CEO, spot on. I would summarize and just say, to tag on to what you talked about, was we care about the industry, and that's important, meaning the providers of goods and services to the marketplace. It's very important that we get our services and our goods to the stores and the distribution channels. So we really love working with multinational corporations and food and beverage companies and the OEMs to create a talking space of excellence for both of them. So our experience in these 30 years has looked out and said, what can we do to help in this industry to make sure they reach their goals, do it for profit, and at the same time, have fun doing it? Because we're going to be working most of our lives. So let's have some fun while we're chasing this thing. So thank you for inviting us.
That's great stuff. It's our pleasure. Robert, tell us a little bit more about Innoflex. In the end, who calls you? So who calls you? Who should call you? It's the CPG, it's the manufacturer, or it's the brand owner, or is it the OEM? So because you act, I would call it a triad, but actually there are more players involved when you're expanding your manufacturing capacity and so on. And so do you get involved when companies want to grow? Do you get involved when they want to optimize? How do you get involved?
Great question, Chris. We are involved really in two strategic areas. So let's talk about capital investments. So whether you're a food and beverage company, a producer of goods and services, or a supplier to them, an OEM, on CapEx solutions to the CPGs, we work with both. So who calls us? Both. It depends on the cycle in the year. So if let's look at the cycle of expenditures for the industry, the food and beverage industry. So the driver of the industry are the food and beverage companies. They tap on the door of the OEMs and they say, yeah, we want to buy this new packaging system from you, and we need it installed at this duration, this period of time in the forward part of the calendar downstream. So the OEMs now get engaged, and now they're on their calendar cycle to deliver that asset. So really the key for our company is working. In this past year, we've worked probably 50-50 with both parties. I'm not sure what the future looks like. I can say that the industry is accelerating, meaning the need for services and equipment in factories and plants are accelerating. And really, it's about the OEMs being able to deliver to the CPGs excellent equipment for a good price that works when they receive it. So I say it's just looking at our data, it's probably a 50-50 split right now. That's this first Q1. As of late, we've had more food and beverage companies and CPGs call on us because it's early in the calendar year.
Mm-hmm.
It's actually early, but it's late because the capital expenditures that they plan for 2021, those decisions for the most part have been made from a budgetary standpoint from 2020. But, there's still opportunities for OEMs to engage. So we service both sides of the industry. I'm pretty sure we're going to navigate our way into probably more of a pendulum. That's just how it flows for our business, and we'll react accordingly. But we can work with both sides easily. So we've got the bandwidth.
And it's interesting because throughout your career, you've had the opportunity of working on both sides. It's not that you only understand the CPG side, but you also understand the OEM side. So it's good that you know where the gaps are, right?
Well, it's an advantage. It is an advantage. And I think that's I call it our value proposition, that we can work strategically in these gap areas because you're siloed. If you're a CPG, you're siloed in what you're doing day to day to deliver for your customers and consumers. An OEM is siloed to deliver on a schedule to a certain set of standards to their customer. And with all that, those separate programs to deliver, there are gaps. And what we try to do is overcome the gaps that are seen in startups or in operations where you realize abnormalities that could be a problem for you as you try to grow your brand or your business or reduce costs in operations. So we want to help have that conversation early for both the OEM and the CPG, so that we don't have these big valleys of variable costs that no one really wants. Even though you sell more, you can hide some of the mistakes because you get more volume. At some point, it levels off. The food industry levels off and it goes up and down. You're going to have to go back and start looking at costs. And we want to make sure you can do it quickly.
Excellent. And so in this process of expanding your manufacturing capacities and getting new equipment, are you seeing the discussion about data becoming more often? Or because we're talking a lot about digital transformation in the factories and so on, and this digital revolution and automation, when does it come to the table? Or are you seeing any change in that? Okay, I'm getting a new piece of equipment. What kind of data can it deliver? Or what kind of information can I get out of it? How are you seeing these changes? Is something changing? Or?
Oh, wow, that's a great question, Chris. And it's very interesting. It's almost like buying a new car. And on the dashboard, you have all these different digitalization features. Looks different. You can immediately see some benefits, some you don't know without training, some you will never use. But let's take that analogy of an automobile back to digitalization inside the food and beverage industry. It is a transformational business right now, for sure. It's the wording of digitalization, what that means when you bring it into an organization at the different levels of an organization. It really starts with a conversation about your customers' goals, and how they're structured from, say, their sales and marketing side and what their goals would be, to the technical function sides to produce those goals. For instance, more product or certain innovation and brand innovations, or reducing costs through operations on the maintenance side to bring that cost down, people costs, and also part costs, and also variable costs. So really, when you go into an organization, they're looking at digital or trying to harness the framework of digital, looking at their business operation. How does it work? How can I improve it? So digital, from, let's say, some of the multinationals, they're probably process oriented. They're always got these background processes that they have that they're looking to optimize to produce more and to produce it for a least amount of costs. But now you have to bring it into, from the high level, from the C-suite level of, yeah, that sounds great. We really can get 5% more, making this number up, of more throughput, bring our cost targets down by 2%, all those big metrics that you go for. You bring it start down into executional activities in your engineering, in your manufacturing, and your functions. Now that's a different conversation. Now it becomes, what are the routines inside the operations? How do they work today? And then what are the variable things that happen? So really you start with, to answer your question, you start with assessing current conditions. Then you start looking at the tools that are being offered and saying, how does the tool benefit me? i.e., now I have a goal of wanting to reduce maintenance costs. So what tool can I use to get information from the access on that packaging line or that piece of equipment that tells me the heartbeat of that piece of equipment? What's going on with that patient? What's the pulse rate? How many line stoppages? How many goods, products am I getting through the system? So that's just one conversation you start hearing. But on the OEM side, it's a struggle because the OEMs need standardization. What type of data do I provide instead of having all these options that I can't afford to keep in my inventory to be profitable? So the OEMs are trying to standardize on what their multinational customers are asking for in a fashion that delivers a profit for them. And let's just not even talk about the profit. It's about operational excellence. So, it's trying to come together. And that's, again, where Innoflex Solutions, we get involved with, let's have a conversation on these gap opportunities, looking at your business, what your goals and needs are, and applying the technology on digitalization to that tool.
And that's great stuff, Robert. And how do you see the OEMs? Because we see that sometimes OEMs they are not that open to giving away their data. So that kind of transparency, it's like, don't look into my closet.
Yeah.
And on the other hand, you have the customer demand. They have many machines in their factories. It's not only come from one manufacturer. So a couple of OEMs, they are developing their own solutions so that you can track data from that piece of equipment. But that doesn't solve the real issue of the CPG, of the manufacturer himself, because he doesn't want 10 platforms where he can see how the 10 different pieces of equipment are running. So one way or the other, there will be this standardization will need to happen. I see we're still in the beginning in the packaging industry, right? I think it's still they still need to call the OEM and say, hey, come on, give me these 2 data points or 3 data points so that I can know my OE, so that I can know whether my machine is down or not. But I think it's not an easy discussion for the OEM, because they say, oh, now they'll know. Now they'll know how my equipment is really running. How do you see that happening? Are they becoming more open with interfaces so that any solution can tap into it, or how do you see this evolution from the OEM side?
Very good question, Chris. So that's a conundrum or a paradox in the overall industry, meaning there's trouble. I'm going to reframe it. I'm going to look at as an optimist on what really people want. Again, OEMs want to sell more, and they want to be the OEM of choice. The food company wants to sell more and be the food company of choice. The challenge is each side understanding the baseline condition of their products that they produce, and inside their factories, the people, the commodities, the materials, the product, and the behaviors inside their facility, that's their structure and operation inside the CPG's factory. The OEMs, it's about the design, the engineering of that asset, and its capabilities. So every entity has variability. It's just it's nature. So we need to get our hands around the variability. And that's where digitalization comes into play. It helps, and I'm going to answer your question, it helps track and trend baseline conditions that we say this is baseline. And when it goes abnormal one way or the other, we can now, like a heart monitor, we can pulse and check and do something with abnormalities. So to answer your question with OEMs, I think the good OEMs, the ones that really want to be partners, and I'm going to use that word partners with their customers, CPG or multinationals, they're willing to provide the data, but there's a disconnection on what type of device and what data do I need. And let me just rephrase it really quickly here. A lot of the information exists in the assets today with being digital assets. They've got signals that we can extract that's data out, but we need to know where to put it, either on the HMI or a big show board inside the factory is data. But the key for digitalization is let's get our hands around both sides. Where are your baseline conditions on the main 4 inputs that every packaging system, process and packaging system has? Again, it's the inputs of the product, the material, the people that are engaged, their capabilities, shift to shift, different skill sets. It could be permanent employees. It could be temporary employees that they bring in because of the seasonalization of their business. But we need to understand the variability around that and then set sort of the routines. So every line has routines. It could be governmental regulations that you need to perform this routine for a data check, and you have to stop the line to make that intervention. And that causes, so again, these are baseline conditions. And I think the opportunity for OEMs and CPGs is to document baseline, because data will give you what you put in, you're going to get out. The format of the data is how you want to see it, but the data will give you what you put in. So let's understand what the baseline is. And I think from the OEM standpoint, their struggle is more about, will the CPG pay for it? Will they pay for this technology? And I think if once we get further into this discussion, if we ask the question, it would be what's already there on the assets that we just need to tap into and get that information out. So
yeah, we see that that's great, Robert. And what we see is that most of the information for the basic, we have a philosophy at PackIOT that the industry is already, the manufacturing industry is already complex enough for us to add more complexity. So we need to run away from complexity every time that we can, because the industry is already complex enough. The manufacturing industry is already complex enough for us to add more complexity. So we try to keep it simple as much as possible, because otherwise you keep chasing the perfect world with all the data that you need, all the data points. And we say, hey, until you know how your machines are running, until you know what are the most frequent reasons of your downtime in a accurate way. So until you know how much scrap you are producing, and whether how the speed of your equipment is performing. So the three pillars of OEE, these are basic stuff, so that every PLC on every machine, every piece of equipment, they have these data, they have it there. Until you know that those three, you should not start discussing about, oh, I would like to understand the correlation of the temperature of nozzle number 3 and the room temperature with the raw material properties and so on. Before you have the three pillars of the OEE, you should not, and these three pillars to create these data, to generate these data, it's normally okay. It's one sensor normally. If you're counting pieces in the flexible packaging industry, a little bit less. You need, but it's again, you're counting meters coming out of the flexible packaging printer, flexo printer. But so it's one sensor. And sometimes I see that, and I totally agree with you, the good OEMs, they understand that it's I cannot hold on to it and say, oh, my precious, my data, oh, I will not, I can, so it's a losing game. And I think the good OEMs, they understand, okay, it's one signal. The bad OEMs, they say, let me send you a quotation, and you will need a different module, and they make it sound complicated. And then the poor customer, for big multinationals, that's okay. But when we talk, especially to the small and medium businesses, they struggle with that because they say, "Oh, come on, it's," and so that's. I want to see how it develops because it's moving really fast.
Yeah, Chris, one of the things, I didn't mean to cut you off, but just on this point, with my frequent engagements with multinationals, the good thing about Innoflex Solution, we have access to the industry. So we see the industry and what's changing and the tracks and trends. One customer, I cannot mention their name, we were talking, did some work with them. They were saying, yeah, it's great. Digital is great. Give me the information that's already on the machine out so that I can start making sense of it. Help me understand what baseline is. And you, Chris, you said it right on head. Adding more widgets and devices does not transform your business. It complicates it to where people don't take ownership. And if you don't have ownership and buy-in, no matter what we do, you won't have sustainability. So what AI needs to do is drive sustainable results. Two things: transform the organization from where they are to where they want to be incrementally, and create sustainable results. So when you leave, PackIOT leave, and Innoflex Solution leaves the facility, they can maintain that asset and be owners of the asset. And that's what's kind of missing, is that engrafting the OEM and the CPG to be co-owners. And you're only going to do that, let me just say it today, through people. And yes, with automation, robotics, and things that are already programmed. But as long as we have people, we're going to have to create ownership.
Yeah, people. Yeah, that's and to maintain it, that's the biggest challenge, and that's where this information design needs to be really well done, or these how information flows, this transparency of data, because implementing something is not difficult. Maintaining something running, or the sustainability, is the most difficult part. And if you choose complexity, you'll make a way of making it work for the first month, this 2 months, but then you lose engagement of the people. And without the people in the center, and I normally say, okay, without it's not only people in general, of course, everybody counts, but especially the people on the shop floor. Because these guys, they are just getting demands from above, and the CEO, he has a great idea, and then the poor operators, they just get some new forms they have to fill out, and they don't know why. They don't know. It's because somebody had a great idea in the meeting room with air conditioning, and sitting there, and someone had. And then the guy needs to fill out another form and so on. So I think the best approach to technology is not how you collect data, the signal itself, is how you help the people on the shop floor, to put those people in the center, to put of the problem, and to design for them above all things. Because if they use it, if they adopt it, then the rest of the organization can have accurate and reliable information. If you're not helping those people that are really working on it on a daily basis, that sometimes in the heat, in a noisy space, and so on, if these guys are not getting help from us, technology suppliers, or from the organization with the information structure, then nobody will win in the end, because you have to help those people. And I think that's one thing that I believe as well.
So we have to be cautious, because digitalization is the way forward, for sure. Again, is it solving a problem that in existing operations, or will it prevent a problem on new investments? Yeah. And it has to be a metric that is achievable, meaning pieces per minute per hour, you're going to be able to reach that goal, reduce costs. And the big win, the big piece today in the transformation we've had globally, it's about not being able to physically be on someone's shop floor to do site acceptance tests and factory acceptance tests because of the pandemic, as you know, in our current world. So how do you navigate that? Even when you were physically going for factory acceptance tests to Europe or Europe coming to the US, the success rate of FATs in the old model was 50%. And this is just my assessment working 30 years, meaning that means the first time you go, you want it to be successful. No, there's 2 or 3 sometimes. And there's a myriad of reasons. We cannot get into that discussion in this webinar. But with digitalization, what we found is happening is those tools help enable succeeding and performing the FATs through, HoloLens glasses, Google Lens, those type of tools where you can go in and not physically be there, but conduct the FAT there's some caveats there. You've got to have good processes and procedures in place that make sense to both the food company and the OEM. And you validate that by using these tools. And on the flip side, you now with the business growing, we need to get more stuff in. It's all this innovation bottled up inside these companies to want to produce the next greatest widget quickly. The overall capital investment cycles are being suppressed. Instead of 18 months from a purchase order to installation, it's 12 months or less. How are you going to do that in the same old paradigm? We have to use and embrace digital. And we have to be smarter in these conversations in the beginning with our OEMs and with the food companies, and the OEMs going into the food companies, having a open collaborative conversation, Chris, as you said, and saying, here's what our capabilities are. To really have a true partnership, you have to be transparent. You have to say, here are the capabilities of my asset, and the CPGs have to say, here are the capabilities of my operation. Help me be better. And when you do that, what you uncover are opportunities, and neither one of them knew that was there, because they're sharing information and they're solving problems together, buying the right tools to create the success stories. And that's what's needed today with technology. Digital is an enabler to achieve the goals that you have set forward, and using that technology to drive those results. And one final analogy here: ownership of digitalization and technology, it only happens if there's a pain point that people feel, like medicine. If you're hurting, you take an aspirin, or you put a bandage over it, put an antiseptic on the infected area, and now you're happy. You don't really care about what type of bandage it was. You really didn't care about the ointment. You cared that it stopped the pain. So we need to think about digitalization of finding its root inside organizations to help them transform and transition to where they want to be.
Excellent. I normally say that a fool with a tool is still only a fool.
Yes. That's a good analogy.
In the end, it's not the tool itself. It's what you do with it. It's what actions you take with the aim of it. And above all, I think one thing that came up a lot in this conversation is, and I think that is central for this discussion, is transparency. Data is bringing transparency to the organization and to the relationships. So you stop discussing whose fault it is, and you look at the problem with the same understanding. You say, okay, this is what we've got. So what are we going to do about it? And this is valid for the relationship between OEM and CPG, but also inside the factory between operator and shift leader, between shift leader and production manager. Because instead of, when you don't have data that you can trust, everybody gets a little bit suspicious, right? Oh, that's somebody somebody must be cheating here. Something is not right. So you you lose trust. You lose trust in everything. So everybody. It's difficult to build trust without transparency. When you have data that really helps you, you stop. So these discussions, they stop. They simply, instead of asking, "Hey Robert, why didn't why have you produced so have your shift production has been so low?" Instead of that kind of discussion, is, "Hey Robert, I've seen that it was quite low. Do you need some help?"
Exactly.
Because the explanation is already there. What happened is already there. What the downtime was and the reasons is already there. And then you you start getting on the same side of the table and saying, "Hey, what are we going to do about it?" So that's what I think. And again, it comes back to the processes, to the transparency, to the people, and technology as an enabler of that.
Yeah, Chris, you're spot on. I would add that what's missing, and I lived the world when I worked for multinationals, was understanding the condition of your house, your factory. It sounds really novel and basic, but there is a lot of noise, and the noise just needs to, if you take apart running a production line faster, as you know, from a mathematical model, doesn't equate that you'll produce more in the end. It just means you run faster, you may have more waste. So we need to take that same thought process and say, wow, let's look at our areas of input on the line. If anything we can take away from this conversation, I want to get this to the audience. It's really, what are your inputs to your operation, and establish baseline conditions. Write it down. Then you can document that as far as inputs into your data tracking system to measure against. Then you have the conversation, as Chris said, when the things were not running well. It disarms everyone from saying, oh, that product had a different temperature today, therefore it caused a variableness that shut the line down. We know it happened because it was outside of its norm. And that's the kind of stuff we need to start bringing in. Start with the basic building, the foundation. And I would recommend incrementally add in digitalization. Don't go full gamut if you're not mature yet. Nothing wrong with saying, I'm not ready to take the whole pie. Take a small piece, get a win, create the morale building in your factory, get ownership, everyone to see the results, then bite off a little bit more. Then you grow into it. And that way you have sustainability.
Yeah. Otherwise, the process can be really frustrating, right? And we also it's also part of our philosophy to start small and learn and iterate. So it's the typical PDCA, but I think many until a few years ago, digitalization was a huge project. It was something huge, and okay, a lot of capex, a lot of risk, a lot of investments up front without knowing what's going to come back, what am I going to get from all of this. So we normally have this belief as well that okay, what's the smallest area or department where I can start and test it and learn, so that I can expand with less risk. I think that's also great. That's also really important.
Chris, you brought up a good point earlier about an OEM being able to sell it or offer digitalization. Here's the key for OEMs to think about, and for your customer, your food and beverage company. It's called continuous improvement. And if you look at a virtuous circle of improvement, a feedback loop. So what you're selling is, you as an OEM, you get the feedback into your R&D development on the performance of your asset to improve your asset on the next version or the existing model number of your asset, your equipment. You can now improve it and be proactive to your customer and say, I am seeing that our machine is it's not performing where it needs to. We've already been working on it in our engineering team. We've got like an upgrade. You get these application upgrades, Microsoft, I should be using their name, but software upgrades. You should also be looking at upgrading your equipment to your customer That shows you're engaged. That shows that you're connected. That's the value proposition when you go into your CPG. And for a CPG or multinational, trust me, they're always trying to improve, because if you can improve existing assets to produce more, you need to spend less on new CapEx investments for new production lines. So you can get more percentages off the existing lines. You've got your costs are fixed, or you reduce the variableness, and you have more favorable operations. And your owners would be happy with you. They'll say, wow, you can produce pretty good in this factory. Go change this factory to do the same thing you just did, because you've got this virtuous loop, feedback loop. So digitalization allows you to have this continuous feedback loop for improvement.
And what I believe that will enable this kind of behavioral change, Robert, in the industry in general, it's already happening. It's the as a service mindset, the business model, the change in the business model. I think when we're moving from a CAPEX mentality to a NOPEX mentality,
It's true.
It forces all parties to think in long term, to deliver value the whole time. Because instead of a salesman just going out there and closing the deal of the year, that will be enough for him to hit his quota of the quarter or whatever. And then, okay, the sales is done. And it's different from just, okay, if it's as a service, the software industry is already going in that direction. I think in the OEM industry, it's already starting to happen. There have been talks about label printing as a service and so on, this kind of stuff. And I think that forces all parties to solve the problems on the same side of the table. I think in software, in our case, for instance, when we implement PackIOT at a customer, then we don't have an option. It's other than delivering value to our customers all the time. Because if a customer doesn't stay with us for years, it's bad business. So we're making money in the long term together if the customer is being successful. Because if he's not being successful, he'll call us one day and say, hey, Chris, you're a nice guy, your company is nice and so on, but I'm sorry, I'm not getting any results out of this. So unfortunately, I'll have to cancel. Fortunately, it hasn't happened yet, but if we're not delivering value, if we had just sold one big project, then we would just rush to the next big project. And the one that has already been implemented, that's in the past. Let us look for the next big project. And I think it forces a change in the mindset of all players in the industry. I think that's one thing that is coming. It's coming first in the software industry, but you already see a lot of as a service solutions. And I think that might change the manufacturing industry as well.
Yeah, it's needed.
Yeah. Perfect. Sure. Robert, would you like to share some final thoughts? It has been, time flies, and it has been a great conversation. But would you like to share some final thoughts on this? Something that...
Yeah, Chris, thank you. Again, thank you, PackIOT, and yourself, Chris, for inviting me to be part of this webinar, this podcast. It's been great. There's more in-depth things we could have went into. Again, I'd like the audience to know that there are things we haven't talked about here that could probably help you today. And that's important. What can you do today to transform your business? I would say that, Innoflex Solutions exists to really help build and help you reach your goals from a technical standpoint and from an engineering, technical manufacturing standpoint on the existing operations and on the front end, and also to technical business development. Why should you buy these assets to put in your factory? Why does it make sense for you? From a consulting, the best-in-class decision-making process, we can help you there. I think, just to close this down, that over 30 years working for global multinational corporations, installing production systems globally, leading engineering teams to design and engineer these assets, and then buying these assets. What I've seen is the same systemic challenges, and they're in 4 areas. And you keep hearing me go back there. I'm going to call them their 4 inputs. The industry doesn't really look at the 4 inputs until they're problems. For instance, we don't call you in for a service call unless something breaks down, right? Well, then, all right, so let's fix the breakdown in the beginning in the design phase. Let's start looking at that feedback loop. So I would say that let's start looking at those 4 inputs, and that's where Innoflex Solution has expertise. We look at why operators perform the way they do, how to design a line, utilizing operators' best potential. What are variability in products, and how do you track and trend that? How do you design for that? Then the method of which a line runs. A production line runs a certain way. It's called modes of operation. We can just go through what that means for you, and so that you spend the least amount of capital and have the greatest return and have an efficient line. And at the end of the day, I've been in a lot of factories where I walk the floor and you see some people not very happy. The morale is low. Well, what we want to do is have smiling faces. When you walk in, they're so bored, they don't know what to do. The line's running well, and they do their routine. So we want to say that this industry is growing still. Technology is exponentially going to grow. But us as Chris, your company, and my company, Innoflex Solutions, we want to be partners working with the food and beverage industry to help them win and be successful. So thank you for inviting me, Chris.
It's been a pleasure. I'm sure that the audience will carry a lot of food for thought from this great webinar. And thank you once again. And I would hope that this conversation doesn't end here. So if you have any questions, if you have any comments or feedback, we would love to hear them. I'll share Robert's contact details. Please feel free, right, Robert, to
sure.
reach
Yes.
out to Robert with comments or questions to continue this discussion. So that's what we like to help this industry to achieve, is to discuss more, to learn more, to share more knowledge, and this is what we're here for. So thank you once again, Robert. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye.
All right. And thank you to our audience, to everyone who has been with us.
All right. Bye-bye.